This is not good news for Penn State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host, and I'm joined by Rivals publisher for Penn State, Rutgers, UConn. That is Richie Schnyderite over on the other side. And Richie, I wish we were getting together on better terms because there's been some bad news here for Penn State. The latest intel on guys like Benedict Umeh, Nick Marsh, some other players that we're going to talk about on this episode are not good. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. This could be a problem because I've been saying for consistent podcasts, and I've been getting some feedback, some friendly, some not so friendly feedback about saying that Penn State has a top 10 class guaranteed. But this was with the idea in mind that Penn State was going to get Benedict Umeh, that Penn State was going to get T.A. Cunningham, that Penn State was going to get Nick Marsh and get that 4 wide receiver set for the class of 2024. But aside from, we'll get to Cunningham in a second, but let's start with the priorities that were remaining out there. And that was Benedict Umeh, who was going to be a high-profile defensive lineman for Penn State, and Nick Marsh, who is a big, big wide receiver target, literally and metaphorically, for Penn State. And now it sounds like they're going to be going elsewhere.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just start with Benedict Umeh, Canadian native. He's only been playing football for about like a year and a half now. But he's ranked a high four-star. Number 151 for us in the country. He's a phenomenal prospect. He's taken visits to Wisconsin, Duke, Penn State, and Stanford. He's also got Florida in his top 5 as well. But yeah, we were very hesitant. I know a couple other networks were like, hey, everyone heard like Penn State, and everyone future casted them, everyone crystal balled them. And I told Dylan, like, even Dylan was very close to the future casting at one point. I was like, hold on. Like, my intel's saying something completely different. Let's wait and see what happens with Stanford. I know the kid's very high on the academic side of things, which you can argue most kids are. But when I heard it from him and his side of the story, his parents are super, super big on academics. So this kind of makes sense based on visits alone. When you see Duke, Penn State, Stanford all in the same category. Yeah. You could even argue Wisconsin as well. Florida, we'll argue that for another day. But when you see that list, I was told, like, basically, all right, hold on, let him take the Stanford visit, and then if you're that confident afterwards, then go for the future cast. He takes the Stanford visit, and all of a sudden, Stanford's in the lead, and it's like, kind of heard what was going to happen already. Yeah. So now we know he's kind of leaning Stanford at the moment.
Yeah, and Penn State, at least people got the inclination, and so did I, because he posted on social media, him and Cunningham going back and forth about, hey, we're planning something big, #WeAreRight. It's pretty simply put. And Umeh, consensus 4-star, a prospect that Deion Barnes, because I had said that July was going to be the month for Deion Barnes, and this was part of it. It was part of getting Benedict Umeh. It was Malachi Williams. I think the jury's still out on Jaylen Harvey, who we're going to discuss in this as well. But Benedict Umeh, part of this was the fact that he did get all these projections to Penn State, that people were giving out ratings of a 6 or a 7, saying that, hey, we feel pretty confident that Benedict Umeh is going to Penn State, alongside guys like Nick Marsh. So, Richie, what's the latest on Marsh? Because I thought he was going to complete this wide receiver set, but it also didn't make any sense to me that Penn State was recruiting heavily these other wide receiver targets if they were the favorites to land Nicholas Marsh. I know that you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch here, but at the same time, they felt really confident that they were going to go to all 4 of their priority targets. And now it seems like they're pivoting and really having more conversations with other players like a Dre Hawkins, who we know we committed to Florida. But what happened here with Marsh?
Yeah, so honestly, before the visit, it sounded like Penn State was really confident that Marsh was still going to end up in State College. Yeah. And Marsh, top 50, 55, so he's number 54. 5.93 star, number 2 in Michigan, number 11 overall wide receiver in the country. Like, phenomenal prospect. Had a top list he put out, and it's Pittsburgh, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan State, Kansas. Took official visits to all of them but Pittsburgh or but Oregon. And like I said before, it sounded like the Nittany Lions were in the heavy lead going into this Michigan State visit this past weekend. And then all of a sudden he goes to Michigan State. They pitch him on a couple things. It's NIL related, obviously. I don't think that's any question about it. He was a previous Michigan State commit. He's from Michigan. He's a River Rogue native of Michigan. And he was committed to the Spartans for about 9 months. So it's not too shocking, the fact that it sounds like he might recommit, but most recommits don't end up working out. So we'll wait and see what happens here. But it does sound like the Spartans have retaken a lead, and whether that be NIL incentive based or not, but I mean, definitely sounds like it was. But we'll see what happens over the next what is it, a week before he commits, or a week and a half, something
July
like that.
7th.
So,
yeah,
it's a week and a half at this point. But yeah, it sounds like Michigan State is in the lead. We'll see if Penn State can somehow swing that momentum back in their favor or not. But right now, it sounds like Marquise Higgins is going to lose out on this one.
I saw all the Twitter posts, right? I think that's where I'm the most active when it's trying to gather all of this intel. And that's where recruits, that's where they can explain themselves, right? Sure, you can post a picture on Instagram, but you can write out and type out your thoughts and really connect with a lot of these people that are reporting on recruiting, like yourself, like Adam Friedman, just to name a couple here, Dylan. And Nick Marsh is an interesting case because he was committed to Michigan State. He decommitted, and I feel like maybe that was a chance to say, hey, are there better options out there? He did say in his Twitter posts that, or at least Twitter posts had said that Nick Marsh did admit that Michigan State, he always loved the place, and that fire, that passion for Michigan State never really left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, end of the day, he does love Michigan State. It's his hometown school.
Yeah.
It's not far from his house. But you're looking at the Penn State commitment list right now, and you got three really good ones right now.
Yeah.
So you can't argue too much against him staying home, especially when you were able to flip someone who is a local guy in Tassir, Denmark, out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, over Roman Catholic, who ended up flipping from Oregon. But you also landed Peter Gonzalez, who's been really good in camp. Mind you, a knee injury last season, but recovered really well, ran a 4.5, I believe it was, at the recent camp. And for a guy to run a 6'3", 200-pounder off a knee injury to run a 4.5 is insane. Yeah. And then you have Josiah Brown, who's a true speedster, ran a 10.73 100-meter dash, which is like one of the top in all of New York. And I think if I read this correctly, it would be top 7 in state championships of Pennsylvania last year. So I know their track times technically, but these kids are fast as hell. And when you add in Tassir, Denmark, who's got an unlimited potential of a skill set, you can't be too mad when a Nick Marsh type wants to go somewhere else. And plus, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little biased here. I don't think Nick Marsh should be in the top 50. I don't think Nick Marsh should be in the top 150. I think he's a little bit lower than that. And I've been very adamant about that, even as when he was a Penn State lean for a couple weeks now. I think he's a little stiff when it comes to his route running, and especially when it comes to the top of his routes, he has trouble breaking off of that defender. But regardless, it does sound like he's going to end up elsewhere. Penn State's just going to have to look somewhere else to get wide receivers, especially with Jere Hawkins committing to Florida, Nick Marsh potentially committing to Michigan State, and Jalen Hornsby potentially committing to Texas A&M over in the next, I want to say, week at this point.
Yeah, that one's July 1st. The everydayers know this. In the last podcast, the solo one that I did, we discussed that Marsh could potentially go back to Michigan State. I said that it's going to, just because of the looming official visit, right? And that's the hometown school. Marsh and Michigan State was going to continue to battle. So for Penn State to miss here, it's not surprising because recruiting, again, it's such a fluid situation. And I just thought it was interesting that Penn State continued to host different wide receiver targets. I know you don't want to show your hand, but it really just didn't make sense to me. We'll continue with what Penn State is going to do next, right? It's trying to figure out what the game plan is going to be moving forward and how all of this happened, because yes, they were Penn State leans. After those official visits, it seemed like the Nittany Lions were a surefire favorite to get guys like Marsh, like Umeh, who we've mentioned, Deyvid Palepale. Before we get to that, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, folks, and there's no better place to get in on the Major League Baseball action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is right, $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything in Major League Baseball. You think Aaron Judge will hit a home run? Max Scherzer goes over on his strikeouts, a sneaky money line underdog pick. You can take any of them. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger chance at a payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance at the no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get your free no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Happy Valley Insider. Visit pennstate.rivals.com, happyvalleyinsider.com, whichever one is easiest for you to get all the latest on Penn State recruiting. And we're talking to Richie over from Penn State Rivals, happyvalleyinsider.com. Richie, Deyvid Palepale was someone who was projected to Michigan, then had the Penn State official visit, and it seemed like everything was good for the Nittany Lions. Deion Barnes, the month of July was going to be the month for him. And now USC gets into the mix. And this is interesting because Palepale, part of his decision was factored in how close the school was going to be to his current home.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It makes me giggle a little bit because we were told basically he was going to want to stay home. His family wants him to stay close to home, to the state of Pennsylvania. And that was a big reason why Michigan wasn't a factor anymore. And then all of a sudden he goes out to an official visit to USC this past weekend, and everyone knew he was going to take that visit. We waited on it. We were ready to go. Like, I'll be honest with you, like he's told multiple people he was going to Penn State, including us. And now all of a sudden that visit changed a lot of things. Yeah. What was said on that visit, me and you will both never know. I think a lot of people in the media, in the public eye, will never know what happened. But I think we can all have a pretty good guess of what probably happened and what was probably said on the table in terms of, dollar signs at this point, because NIL is a factor for everyone. And it does sound like he is a USC lean. It sounds like he will be committing soon, relatively, I want to say the next couple of days, potentially this upcoming weekend even. And it does sound like the Trojans are in the driver's seat now. He's went from a Michigan lean for, I want to say, the past 2 months to a Penn State lean for probably about the past 2 weeks maybe. And now it's completely flipped to USC. And that's just the way recruiting works nowadays. It changes almost hourly. Like if you ask me about a certain kid, say, we're going to go hypothetical here. If you asked me about Deyvid Palepale like a week ago, I would have told you Penn State. You asked me about him 4 days ago. I'm like, Penn State. He takes this visit, and it's like, all right, hold on, time out, USC. And I'm like, all right, well, this is just the way recruiting works nowadays, especially with NIL as a factor. Kids can flip really quickly now. Mind you, it does sound like he's probably going to be a Trojan when it comes to his commitment this upcoming week. I don't think it's over. I don't think anything's said and done by any means. This is just a verbal commitment. It's nothing else. I think this could be a Mason Robinson type situation, who is a guy that most people remember last year's McDonough kid, defensive end, committed to Northwestern, was a Penn State lean for a long time, chose the Wildcats in, I want to say June or July, following an official visit. And then all of a sudden, I think it was November, I believe, he took an official visit to Penn State, flipped immediately, and then there you go. He ends up being a Nittany Lion, and that's that. So now I think this could be another of the type of those situations where you get the kid. Mind you, he already did take his official visit. I think you get the kid back to campus this upcoming season, whether it be the whiteout, whether it be another game. And I think you'd be able to flip him, to be honest. I don't think it's unflippable, this one, especially because California, I mean, mind you, nowhere close to the state of Pennsylvania. So will you get to see him maybe once if you're his family, based on the fact that USC is joining the conference? Sure, maybe over his 4 to 5 year career, but that's about it. I mean, if he comes to Penn State, then you get to see him every weekend for the most part.
Yeah, I think Penn State still holds the cards in this case because he is currently attending high school in Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
originally from Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why USC, if it had been USC, Oregon, Washington, basically any of those West Coast schools, I wouldn't have batted an eye. I did think that Michigan was the interesting one that Penn State was going up against. But then when I saw USC get into the fold, I said, okay, this could be interesting just given that like Oregon, they're able to cherry pick select commits or prospects, I should say, right? That I don't know that Penn State is going to be uh, that likely favorite every single time just because USC and Oregon do come over here with NIL. Is that where all this went wrong? It feels like, Richie, for Penn State, it's not because they're being out recruited, it's because they're being outbid. I think when I think of the Michigan State case with Nick Marsh, I'll go back to him for a second before we
Mhm.
figure out what the game plan is moving forward. Marsh was somebody that is very high up on Michigan State's board because that is the hometown school. He's local, and they do need that's going to be their premier wide receiver prospect. For Penn State, the same
Mhm.
can't be said between Peter Gonzalez, who's really emerged here as of late. He's recovered well from the injuries and he projects well as a prospect. And
Mhm.
then you flip your premier target in state in Tyzier Denmark, which is the equivalent to Marsh going to Michigan State. And then you get another commit in Josiah Brown, who is almost consensus the top prospect in the state of New York.
Mhm.
You are not the alpha out of this group for Penn State, but it seems like in this case, NIL is an extreme factor here, and Penn State is allocating resources to these guys. It's like, well, here's the problem, because I don't want people to get the misunderstanding that, well, Penn State doesn't have the money, they don't have the NIL, they're behind, they don't know what they're doing. No, they do know what they're doing, but Michigan State is going to focus more resources, more attention to someone who's number one on their board versus Penn State, who says, okay, well, we do have four of you in this room and we're going to treat you all as equals.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's secret. Penn State has NIL.
Yeah.
Now they don't have a significant NIL by any means. I'm not saying they're top tier when they're, and everyone knows who those top tier guys are because they're flaunting it too, which is
Mhm.
kind of ridiculous. There's just no rules at this point. It's a wild west situation where
Yeah.
Miami, Texas A&M, Florida, just to name a few, like Florida doesn't get what was it, 5 commits in one weekend.
Yeah.
Unless you have an NIL situation, especially when 4 of those commits were leaning elsewhere before going into the visit. Like, let's just be honest. Miami does the same thing. Texas A&M has, I know it's a joke around college football, but like it's legitimately oil money. Like this is NIL money from like
Yeah.
big oil company guys. But yeah, no, and I mean Penn State definitely has a pretty good NIL situation, but it needs a little bit of help too. Like I'm not saying it's going to be a difference maker overnight, but they're going to need some help from the fan base and stuff like that. But in terms of donating when it comes to a top prospect versus not top prospect, I think they'd be pretty close to, if not matching, for like a Nick Marsh type situation. I just think the fact that it's hometown for him, and he was committed to Michigan State in the first place, so he does like this program of the Spartans a lot. Is Mel Tucker the best salesman in the world? No, I
Yeah.
personally think if you want me to be honest with you, and this is just a non-biased opinion, the man's a con man. Like that's just the way he is. He got one really good year with the portal, and he banked that season on Kenneth Walker, and that's just what he is. He had one great season with a great running back. What did he do after that? Absolutely nothing last year. What is he going to do this year? Probably nothing again. I don't see him competing for that Big Ten East title, or Big Ten East title, or the Big Ten championship whatsoever. I don't know if he does it in the future at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's tough to like be upset when a kid wants to stay home too, because look at the Tysier Denmark situation. That's what all fans were talking
Yeah.
about. They're like, why does he stay home? It doesn't make sense. Like he's a Pennsylvania kid. He should be at Penn State. And look at it now. Now he's going to Penn State. Now it's like, all right, Nick Marsh doesn't make sense. Why is he going to Michigan State? And I'm like, oh, it's a hometown kid. If he wants to stay home, he wants to stay home. Like I understand that more than anything, and it makes a lot of sense to me because I'm the product of it. I transferred out of school and I went back home, and I was like, all right, wait, hold on, like this is home. So it's a little different from my perspective, but it makes sense for Nick Marsh to probably stay home and go to Michigan State in the end.
Well, Penn State's still got to be able to fill that void when it comes to recruits. For all the latest in recruiting, you check out happyvalleyinsider.com. And Richie, where can people keep up with what you do individually?
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to keep up with what I do personally, pennstate.rivals.com, aka happyvalleyinsider.com for all your Penn State content. If you want other recruiting content, I retweet just about anything from the Northeast area, whether it be offers or commitment tweets, visit tweets, top fives, etc. Follow me on Twitter at Rivals Richie. I'm sure you can see it on the podcast if you're watching on YouTube. If not, it's at Rivals RICHIE Richie. Yeah, just like I said, just about everything from Northeast recruiting. I'm all on top of it, all over it. So I want to say I'm your go-to guy when it comes to anything Northeast.
And now we get into the game plan here for Penn State in this final segment. And Penn State's not just going to go quietly. They either have to get that scholarship filled by someone that wasn't originally a primary target, but now they move up the board because they're not available anymore. If that particular prospect is going to commit somewhere else, you got to go with your second, third, fourth option. There are quite a few names that I want to know about. I thought that T.A. Cunningham and Benedict Umeh were going to be a package deal, that if one was going to commit, the other was going to commit. It sounds like people are still fairly confident in the recruiting industry that T.A. Cunningham should be a Penn State lean until further notice, and he's out of the Florida area. So despite the Gators winning all these battles, Richie, Penn State's still going to land at least maybe one or two more prospects out of that region.
Yeah, so he's an interesting one specifically. He's a 6'6", 270, top 250 kid. He had a little bit of a drop in the rankings because I think he was actually all the way up to 40-something at one point. I'm sorry, he was up to number 8 at one point about a year ago. He's taken a big dip. So he's from California. He's on his third high school in 3 years, which I hate when it comes to prospects. But so he transferred out of California and he went over to Miami. I think it was Miami Norland last year. Had 0 sacks, and then went to Miami Central this year. And it sounds like he's not even a starter yet at Miami Central. But mind you, there is some like younger kids who are probably higher ranked than him. So it is tough to judge based on that, but it does sound like he's taken a little bit of a dip in terms of recruiting. Now, Penn State's still pushing for him. There's no question about that. Miami still wants him right around the corner at Miami Central High School. He's still massive. He's got good size. He really moves good for his size. It does sound like Penn State's still in the lead there. They did host him not this past weekend, but 2 weekends ago. And I'd argue that the Nittany Lions are in the driver's seat for him. I think he's one to keep a close eye on. And with defensive tackle recruiting specifically, with Palepale going elsewhere and Umeh, who's a defensive end for us, probably going to be a defensive tackle in the future, going elsewhere, I think that they might revisit Xavier Porter. Now, he was on campus, another Florida kid out of Tampa Catholic High School over in, obviously, Tampa, Florida. He's a kid I think they might revisit. So he actually had a top list of Penn State, Louisville, and Kansas. Weird top list for him, but he's a 4-star recruit. It sounded like he was leaning Louisville. It sounds like Kansas made a pretty good push for him. Not unheard of, because I know everyone's going to see those 2 schools and be like, why are we competing with them? Which, whatever, I get it a little bit. But Kansas has a new D-line coach, and it's Jim Panagos, who he's a guy I've dealt with quite a bit in the Northeast during his time at Temple, during his time at Rutgers, 2 times at Rutgers, actually. And he develops defensive linemen better than I'd argue most people do. So he has a keen eye for talent, and he's at Kansas now. And it sounds like Kansas was in the driver's seat. It wouldn't shock me if Penn State just started switching gears here and was like, all right, we lost out on these 2 guys. Let's go back to Porter and just push for him a little bit. And they could land him pretty quickly if that was the case. He's around 6'4", 6'5", 250, 260 range. He's a really good prospect, really good off the snap, quick off the snap. He's a guy I could see them pushing. And then obviously Malachi Williams when it comes to defensive ends. Malachi Williams out of Pennsylvania, who's number 9 in Pennsylvania for our class, which I think is severely underrated. Super fast off the snap, if you want to talk about that. But he's leaning Penn State, it sounds like. And then Jaylen Harvey's the last one that I'm keeping an eye on. I still have a future cast for him to go to Penn State. Had that future cast in for
quite some time.
I don't know how long it's been. Everyone I talk to keeps saying like, yeah, he's going to go to Penn State. He's going to go to Penn State. He's going to go to Penn State since we're talking October at this point. And it sounded like he was going to, like every time he goes to campus, it sounds like the staff expects him to commit. And since I submitted that FutureCast, it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 visits to campus, and he still hasn't committed. So that's where I'm a little lenient now. He did visit Florida this June. He visited Tennessee a couple times. He visited Maryland most recently this past weekend. I don't think they're a factor. I think it's more of like a Florida, Penn State, USC battle. He did visit USC. I'm sorry, I forgot to include that one back on the 16th, but I would argue it's probably more Penn State or Florida.
Yeah.
I like to think Penn State's still in the lead there. They do really well when it comes to Maryland defensive linemen. Don't ask me how, but they are able to pull it out, whether it be denied at Sutton, Mason Robinson, for example. We can even go back to King PJ a couple of years ago, but they do really well when it comes to Maryland defensive linemen, and I think this might be the next one. I think he could be I know he's an outside linebacker for us, but when you look at the size and you see 6'2", 243, it's like, all right, hold on, like let's push him down a bit.
Yeah,
so he will be an edge rusher when it comes to it. I think it's just a matter of more of if USC or Florida really throws out like the dollar signs at him, which it doesn't sound like they are currently.
Yeah.
So it does sound like he'll be a Penn State lean as well. So just based off what I just said, we'd go with Cunningham, Williams, and Harvey, near guarantees to be commits sooner or later. And then Porter's another one I keep an eye on. And then the one I actually completely forgot, DeAndre Cook is defensive end for us. For Rivals, strong side defensive end for Rivals, 6'4", 258. You kind of get the consensus here. They're all around the 260 range. Little undersized for defensive tackles. That's why they're DNs for us in terms of our rankings. But they will be defensive tackles at the next level by the time they pack on 15, 20.
Oh, yeah.
DC kid, really good kid, 5'5", 3-star, which I, again, don't want to pick too much on our rankings, but that one I don't like at all. I think it should be 10 times higher. Similar to Xavier Porter, or Xavier Gillum, sorry. I think they should both be ranked higher. He visited North Carolina, Boston College, and Rutgers. BC was this past weekend, but I have him heavily leaning Penn State, and I think he will decide this Friday, I believe, on July 1st. And that one should be wrapped up relatively quickly, with the other 2 to 3 wrapped up within the next couple weeks.
And then what do you think this is going to do, Richie, to the class of 2024 ranking? Because I was confident, again, we talked about how recruiting will change day to day, hour to hour. I was confident that Penn State had a class of 2024 group that was going to be top 10, definitely. They might finish 8, 9, or 10, but definitely on that bottom side. Top 5 was going to be difficult to do, but it was definitely possible with the way that things were trending. Well, now things are trending in the opposite direction. Does this push them out of the top 10 in your mind? For me, it kind of does at this point. I hope that changes when July rolls around and they are able to re-recruit, and maybe they can get a Benedict Umeh. Maybe things change with Nick Marsh, but if the way these things are projecting, it doesn't sound good, and that Penn State is going to fall out of the top 10 and maybe push closer to the 15 and hopefully not below.
Yeah, so I mean, right now they're number 6 for us. That's 20 commitments.
Still currently. Pretty solid. Yep. So
I mean, you factor in the 3 to say 4 names I just put in there. 4-star, 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 3-star. So we'll see if all those happen. As long as they happen, I think that they have a really good shot at still finishing top 15, 100%. Top 10, probably say I'm 75% confident, just because some of these guys are going to get upgrades too.
Yeah.
Just for example, like a John Mitchell down in Jacksonville, I think the more we get eyes on him, the more we're going to notice that he's a dominant corner. He's a lockdown corner. He's a great one-on-one person. Caleb Brewer impresses me every time. I know we have him listed as an athlete, although he could be an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, whatever.
Anything. Really.
It doesn't even matter because he's that good. Egan Boyer's one I'm keeping a close eye on. A lot of people are underrating him, and I think it's just because of his lack of weight. He is 6'8", which is massive, but 6'8", 260. You look at him, he's kind of lean with his frame and everything. And our rankings sometimes are based on pro potential, and obviously he needs to pack on weight in order to even get to that pro potential. I think he's going to pack on a lot of weight this offseason. From what I've been told, he's already packed on 12 to 15 pounds based on the 260 range. So do the math there. It's like 272 to 275. If he can keep packing that on by the time September comes and get up to 280 or so, That's going to be huge for his development. And I think on top of that, he's just got a nasty mean streak to him. And I think he's going to be a really, really good lineman. I think that was a sneaky good get for them. On top, just looking at the rest of the list, Ethan Gruckenmeyer has been phenomenal. He looked really good in the Elite 11. Maybe not top 5 good, but he was still a top 10 quarterback by far. Currently, I think we have him in like 20 something. So I think that's going to change when our next rankings update comes out. Vabu Toure, I think he's a phenomenal prospect out of Irvington High School. I think a big knock on him is that he plays such bad competition sometimes, which he gets lazy and he sees that and he knows he can get away with the laziness. And it drives me nuts a little bit. Like, cause I see him in camps and in just practices for his high school team. And I'm like, dude, like, you're so good. Just stop being lazy. Like, I don't have to push. Like, that guy's not going to run past me. And I'm like, I know, but like, show your like charisma, like be out there, like line up and get ready. He's like, nah, that kid can't run past me. We're fine. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. He can be really good. Josiah Brown, I think he'll end up getting a 4th star when it's all said and done. He's a super speedster kid. Like I mentioned before, 10.73, 100 meter dash, which is equivalent to, I believe, a 4.5 40, maybe a little lower. I know he's clocked a 4.44 before on a laser, which you guys hear that and it's like, oh my God, that kid's fast. Like, he just needs to learn the game a little bit more. He's still figuring it out. And I know he's been playing football for a long time, and he's another one. He plays such bad competition that you don't even have to run around the guy. You can literally just go cut left, and like that guy falls right, and it's like, all right, like what do we do? What are we doing out here? So as long as he gets to play some better competition this year, which it sounds like they're going to, because they're going to travel to New Jersey a couple times to play kids, play other high schools. So I think he's going to be a 4-star. So it's going to be really close to that top 5 range. I still think they will finish top 10 when it's all said and done with all the updates, with all the new commitments and all that. So I think this is still going to be a very, very good class for Penn State.
Yeah. You mentioned Grunkmeyer. Luke Reynolds, I think, is going to get a boost. So those are just a couple that come to mind for me who are very underrated as 3 stars, ultimately should be 4 stars. At the end of the day, Penn State is going to be around that border. It felt safe to me that they could be 7th or 8th, because I know Alabama's going to jump back into the top 5 eventually. Ohio State, I hate it. They've been doing well as of late, but they're going to start to solidify themselves as a top 5 as well. And then that bumps Penn State down a few spots, but top 10, still very confident about that. And hopefully it doesn't get into 15 and even worse inside of the top 20. But Richie, like I said, I started this episode off with, I wish we could have met on better terms. We could have had a discussion on better terms, but this is the news cycle, right? We're reporting the latest, and hopefully some fortunes change with some other targets that they have left out there in the month of July.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully next time we get a couple commitments by now. And then, like I just mentioned before, there could be upwards of 3, 4, maybe even 5 commitments over the next couple weeks.
Thanks again for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you like what we do here, follow along on Twitter at Locked On Nittany. You can follow my personal account at Zach_Seyko. Review us wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube.